Okay. So if I can call this special meeting of the Fairfield Board of Education to order for Tuesday, April 21st, 2015. Just before I call the roll for the massive amount of audience that we have out there. Although it does not show it on our agenda, our new bylaw allows for public comment on discussion items. Our old bylaw, we only took it at the time of the vote. And so the item of district improvement plan will be, for those who may want to make a comment on it, the rule will still be the same. You can comment at the beginning of the meeting or after the board has discussion. If you want to come up and comment at that time, you may also, you can choose that method. You can't do both, either the beginning or when the item's here. So with that said, that's kind of my way of giving you some advance notice if you so choose to speak. Present is Mrs. Eileen Lou McCormick, Ms. Donna Carnell, Mrs. Jessica Gerber, myself, Philip Dwyer, Mr. Paul Fattabine, Mrs. Jennifer Maxon Kennelly, and Mr. John Llewellyn. We don't have any indication that our other two board members won't be here, but we'll start anyways. If I have you stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. While this has normally been our self-evaluation meeting, in the handbook that we have that categorizes our various operating principles, bylaws, policies, board practice, has been updated so that we can review it and see if it accurately records prior decisions. And so that's part of self-evaluation, but that handbook needs to be discussed in public session. And at the last meeting, we decided to move discussion of the district improvement plan over to this meeting so that we would not be starting to talk about this very late at night. And so we'll start with the district improvement plan discussion. If you remember, I had asked if our first round of comments or questions could be one of clarity. Could you, ask Dr. Title to clarify what was meant by this item or that item? And then once we go through that, if you could then offer comments that say, what was it that was especially appealing in the plan that you thought needed to be raised up and that should not be lost in the plan as we go through editing? And then finally, what areas that you would like to see improvements on or changes in or something that is missing. So if we could go through that cycle, I think it will be helpful to the staff in terms of capturing the discussion so that they can go through the next round of editing process. And I think it will be helpful also to ourselves to kind of think of it in those three terms. I hope that each of you have had a chance to review it, and you've all remembered Dr. Title's opening remarks about it. And so rather than ask him to repeat that, unless there are desires to have him comment on something to remind you of something, then of course he'll do that. So why don't we just start with questions for clarity's sake that each of you might have on the current draft of the plan. I'll start with one. Dr. Tyler, you've made comments about 200-plus data points. And there are, I forget exactly how many, but about 20 or so student success indicators. If you looked at them and said, but the ones that are probably we should hold up and say, if we get this right, then the others kind of fall into place. What are the ones that, it's hard for somebody in the public to put their arms around 200-plus data points. So what would be the most important ones for us to really focus on in your mind?
Well, I would to focus people on the student performance indicators, it's better to look at the shorter version, which is on pages 16 through 18, rather than try to look at the 200-plus data points that are in the appendix. So that will simplify things for us. And I should just tell you that they're organized in here more or less by level. In other words, not completely, but it kind of starts at post-high school and works its way backwards through the grades so that the very last one is pre-K. Some of them cover all the grades. You know, there's a lot of connections in all of these. I hate to, this is like asking which is your favorite child. Because one of the issues with the indicators is that, you know, there's a lot more to being a successful school system than simply the standardized test scores. And while those are important measures, we really tried to broaden this out. So I guess I would be as interested in some of the, I would call, non-traditional indicators as I would with some of the traditional indicators. For example, we have a new one in here on career and technical education at the high school, which is defined as technology, education, family, consumer science, and business. And one of the interesting measures we put in here is challenging ourselves to increase the number of non-traditional students enrolled in those courses. That's not something you typically see in district improvement plans, and yet that's an important part of what we're trying to do. So I think, obviously, the base academic ones are very important, and I think it's, to some extent, if we get it right in the earlier grades, the more likely we are to continue getting it. So if pressed to the mat, I probably would start to look most closely at the reading and math, star reading and iReady math, 15 and 16, as sort of the foundational skills. And if we get those right, I think we're pretty well set up for success in a lot of other areas. But I just wouldn't want to leave some of the others. You've got some interesting new, really standardized measures on world language achievement, which has never been in any plan before. And then I guess if there were only one, I'm going to be very interested in the post-high school student survey, because ultimately that's the end of the whole game there. And a year out, how kids report back, how well prepared they are for their career or for first year in college is very, very important. So I think both ends are important, but it's very hard to pick one. Because, you know, we've got a very comprehensive system, and we're very proud of that. And we want to show that by what we're measuring.
Thank you. Other questions that board members, Mrs. Lou McCormick, followed by Mr. Fattabine?
Will these statistics be offered by school? Because I think that's important to understand.
Well, this is a district improvement plan. And so the measures in the, that will be reported out as part of the district plan would be district level. They will also be calculated at the school level, because each school is going to have to look at how they're doing on this. But if you look at Appendix A, that's where you have already a couple hundred indicators. If we were to, I mean, not that it couldn't, you know, it can be compiled, but multiply that by 11 elementary schools times 6 grades, and you're going to have data overload. But obviously, we will look at them by school. Schools will use them in their school improvement planning process, so they'll be reported out by school. But it seemed to me that this is a district plan, and we would be looking at how the district as a whole is performing, but doesn't mean we wouldn't disaggregate them by school as well.
So does that mean that we will?
We will do it, but I would not expect that that would be something that, on an annual basis, that there would be a big report on. I just think that it's going to take us all we can do to do these at the district level, but they will be available at the school level. So yes, they will be calculated at the school level. So the
Right,
answer
so
is yes.
if it will be calculated, then
Yes.
can we make it available? Because
Sure.
I guess the question that I would have is that when we set these goals, I assuming at the back you'll be setting targets.
Yes.
So what concerns me is that we set targets that are average targets for the district as opposed to targets that each individual school should be reaching. Because then what happens is you could have a very strong school and a very weak school that leads us to believe that the district is doing fine when actually we have some very real problems.
I understand what you're saying. So what we would ask schools to do, and again, we haven't operationalized this to the school level yet, but all the schools do school improvement plans, and in their school improvement plans, they have to set targets, individual targets. So once you set a district target, that would be in the aggregate, but that doesn't mean that every single school has the same target. You might have a school who is already exceeding that target, and their individual school target would be higher than this. So that it all depends on what your starting point is.
So then that concerns me because that means we have an inequity in expectations.
Well, you can't have it both ways.
I'm saying that we would want to say, like, if we want 80% or 85%, we want
Right.
every school to meet that, period. Not that we have different targets for every school, because again, then that begs the question of why. And then we need to have a discussion as to why the inequity exists, what's driving it, how can we be addressing each one, as opposed to just saying, okay, we want every school, and then everybody who gets 85 or above, okay, fine. But the real concern is the laggards, and if in fact we don't see dramatic improvement from a particular school, that we're just assuming that they don't need to improve, I guess we should consider the range of what we want. Do we want to gauge change? Are we trying to have everybody achieve a common goal? These are the questions that I have when setting targets.
So let me take another tact at it. If you've got let's just pick one, where the baseline data for the district as a whole is 75%, and we set a target for the district as a whole, 5-year target of 85%, okay? You may have schools already that are at 90% right now, and you might have another school that's at 65% right now. Are you saying that the school that's at 90% should set a target of 85 because that's what all the other schools have? I don't think that's what you mean, right?
No, that's what I just said. How are we setting the targets? Because are we going to set a target of change? So we could say we want each school to improve by at least 5% with, of course, a maximum of 100%. Or are we going to say 75% or 85? You see what I'm saying? It's a different question. This goes back to the same question that we asked when we were doing teacher assessments and the performance of students academically. Are we measuring the change, or are we setting absolute levels?
So you would expect that wherever they start, as school starts, that we would expect to see positive growth over the period of time, no matter where their starting point is. You could, I mean, we haven't gone through the target setting process with individual schools, but if we look at, I mean, theoretically, you could say if the district is setting a target of 10 percentage points over 5 years, that every school will be expected to, from wherever they start, be 10 percentage points higher than where they are.
Exactly, with a maximum of 100%. So
Right.
then we catch every school's performance within our target setting.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. No, we certainly don't want a school to say, well, the district targets is 85, and we're already at 85, so we're off the hook on that one, right? We want that district to push, we want that school to push to 95, right? Because realistically, the only way for the district to achieve its overall target is to have all the schools probably move up, from wherever they start. So I wouldn't want to say that the district target is, say, 85%, and every individual school target is also 85%, because you may have schools that are already at 90, and we might want them to get to 100. Does that help?
Exactly.
Okay, good.
That would be helpful. And so then back to my question, if we do it by school, it's important, I believe, that we have transparency as to which schools are actually achieving that 10% increase versus those that are struggling, because then we go back to best practices and analyze and understand what the problems are. Because the ones that are slow to achieve that growth are the ones where we need to understand what's happening.
Yes, but I just want to put one caution on some of these. Where we have large numbers of students being tested, school-by-school results are, for lack of a better word, valid. In some cases, we're looking at subgroup performance. So when you're looking at the performance of students on free and reduced lunch, in grade 2 at a given school, that number might be, one kid, 2 kids. It's not going to make a whole lot of sense to have a school-based target for that school at that grade. I think we have to look at the size of the groups that we're measuring, and then in some cases, it might make just sense to have a target across, say, the elementary schools, so you can get a decent number of kids, because our free reduced population hovers around 10%. So if you're looking at a school that on average has, say, 50 kids in a grade level, then for that school, you may only have 5 kids in that subgroup. Every kid's 20 percentage points. So that'd be kind of a hard one. But where you have large numbers, it makes sense to break it out by school. But in some cases, it wouldn't make any sense.
Right, so it'd probably be good to understand which subgroups it makes sense for and which ones it
Yes,
doesn't.
exactly. But we've made a decision, and believe me, you could break this thing down by 5 different subgroups. We took the free reduced lunch because it's a good proxy for a lot of the other, issues. But in your larger schools, for example, at your high schools, it's going to be easier to give your subgroups. Your subgroups are more, in middle schools are more likely to have subgroups of a certain size. When the state reports out, when they used to report out CMT and CAP by subgroup, they set a minimum. If you didn't have a minimum number, there was no reporting for that school on that subgroup. And I think at one point it was 20, or was it 40? They've set it at different levels because the statisticians who look at this say, look, if you've got a subgroup of less than a certain N size, then it makes no sense to report that out because one kid is such a large percentage. So
Yeah,
in
no,
some
that
of
makes
these will lend themselves to it.
Right.
But in some cases, I don't think it'll make a lot of sense to have a school-by-school reporting of some of it.
So can I
because
ask
the
which
subgroups are so
subgroups?
small.
Can I ask which subgroups you have decided or are proposing?
They're all in here. free-
Can we
it's-
know which ones we're going to do district-wide versus those which you can do school by school?
We're going to do all of them district-wide. And then we have to look at the number of kids in each school to see how many they are. We don't know what those numbers are at this point. We're going to set the district-wide baseline data and the district-wide target. When we look at the district-wide baseline data, we can identify what the total number of students are right now who fit that number. So when we say, let's just look at, pick one, free reduced lunch. Let's pick out AP scores, percent 3 and above, free reduced lunch. When we look at our baseline data, we can see how many kids we have there, right now. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know how many are in every subgroup. But if we don't have enough in a subgroup, it's not going to make a lot of sense to break it down by school. You're better off keeping it at the district level.
Mr. Lou McCormick, can I move on to Mr. Fattabine and come back to you so that people can have a chance? Mr. Fattabine.
On page 5, you have this cute graph here. And I guess I wanted to just clarify. You have the term gap between points C and B.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess as I understand this graph, line AC represents the measurable improvement over time from point A. So that gap really represents, as I understand it, the measured improvement over time. Is that accurate? Is that what you intended?
Yeah, that's half of it. I think that basically what we're saying in a sort of stylized form is, if we don't do anything new, nothing different, if we don't try to make improvements, what's likely to happen at best over the next 5 years is you're going to flatline and go from A to B, right?
If there's no improvement? No
Right.
change in improvement?
No improvement. In fact, you could argue that, in fact, we probably would go backwards if we didn't keep moving ahead, because the demands on us keep ratcheting up. And so the board's mission is very lofty. The board's mission is aspirational. The board's mission says we want every kid to achieve in this district. And that's not represented by B. That would be more represented by C. And so A to C would represent substantial progress toward that mission, right? Improvement.
Well, I would think, I would like to say we are achieving in the district today. We want more achievement.
Yes. Well, we're shooting even higher than where we are right now. We're not saying in any way, shape, or form that this is a low-performing district, or, but everybody can improve.
Right.
And so basically, the school board set out in words what C is by the mission and goals, okay? We then translate that into, if we were really doing that, if we were accomplishing or getting closer to accomplishing that mission, how would we know? And that's what all the student performance indicators are. And the gap is, what do we have to do differently or more deeply to get ourselves from B to C? So you don't want to just set out a mission that's very difficult to achieve and then not take any actions to try to achieve it.
Right.
And so the specific actions in the back are our attempt to fill the gap between where we would be if we did nothing different and where we aspire to be, and that's what the gap is.
Right. Gap is, in essence, improvement. In my
Exactly.
Right. That's
Yes.
all. I just wanted to make sure.
No, that's right. I'm glad you like that. I think you have mentioned this
I can be
before.
very visual sometimes.
Right. Well, no, it's a very as a matter of fact, I think when I first showed this to you, I called it improvement planning simplified, because it is a pretty simple way of thinking about it. But I can think about it in terms of any improvement you want to make. I mean, like, I'm constantly battling my weight, right? So if I do nothing different for the next 5 years about my diet and exercise, I might go from A to B. I also might go a lot worse than B.
No, all right, we'll
Right?
move on now.
So if I aspire to lose 10 pounds and get my glucose down, right, that's C, right? So I got to do something, or I'm going to end up at B. So my diet is the difference between B and C.
I got it, I think.
And my weight is the measure I'm going to use to see whether I'm successful. How's that?
All right, that's
Okay.
great, that's great. Okay.
Stop talking when you've already sold.
Do I get to continue?
Hey,
Please do.
little strategic planning humor.
In your page 6,
Yes.
you identify the various phases 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
I guess I was a little confused with phase 1. In the terminology you use with respect to student performance indicators, I would have thought initially you said your student performance expectations, and then you determine what indicators you want to use to measure whether or not those expectations were achieved. So at what point or where is the beginning phase, in my belief?
Yeah.
You then set your student performance expectations and what you expect of the students.
Well, I think, in my
You
view, that's
understand
what the
my-
board set with the mission and goals. Those were the student performance expectations. And so our task was, what are the indicators that will tell us whether or not we're meeting those expectations? So that's how I saw it. How's that for a short answer?
Yeah, the educational goals that were passed about a year and a half ago,
Right.
that was the result of that committee that
Right.
Mrs. Brand did, essentially sets the standard that says when a student graduates from our school system, these are the educational goals we expect them to have achieved.
And they're conveniently located on page 4.
And they're in there.
Yes, they are.
I know
Yes,
those.
because that's the start, that's the starting
I
point.
know.
I mean, the entire development of the plan is based around, yeah, page 4, trying to, because those are lofty and challenging to say all kids are going to achieve those, but we have to translate those into something a little more tangible. Because otherwise, I'll say, yeah, we're meeting it, and John will say, no, we're not meeting it, and Jessica will say, yes, we are, and so that's why we tried to come up with a broad base of the student performance indicators, and because the goals are all written in terms of what students should know and be able to do, the student performance indicators are all written in terms of what students will accomplish.
Right. The education goals are relatively broad, in my opinion, and maybe hard to quantify.
Right, and so this is our attempt,
Right.
although imperfect, attempt to quantify those.
Right. So when you say, so your student performance indicators are going to, in essence, determine whether or not the educational goals on page 4 are met in a very broad sense.
Correct. Subject to change as new indicators are developed or thought of.
Okay. On page 8, paragraph numbered 1 on the top portion. On the last line of that paragraph, you say that, I'll read the whole sentence. These indicators are stated in terms of student achievement, learning and outcomes, not adult actions. I don't know what you mean by adult actions.
Okay, that's good. That's a good point. Although it was a question. So all those indicators that we were going over with previously, those are all student achievement-based indicators. So the next question is, what are the adult actions? What are we going to do as employees of the school system, as leaders in the school system, as teachers in the classroom? What are we as adults going to do to ensure that students improve? And that's the second half. So when I'm talking about adult actions, that's all what I call, they're listed as specific actions in the back under each of the strategies. Those are all adult actions. If you look at the back, starting on
I mean, actions the district is going to
undertake. Yes. So if you look at starting on page 22 and going into the back, you'll see a whole long list of specific actions, and these are actions taken by adults,
Or by the district.
by the adults in the district. See, a district doesn't do anything. A district is composed of people.
By the employees of the district?
Exactly.
By
By the adults. That's why adults.
I
The
assume
adults
we
in
all
the
have
district.
adults, but, all right.
Well, just
There's other adults.
we're distinguishing between the students and the adults. We could change adult to staff actions.
Well, in other
but-
words, you don't mean parents of being adults.
Well,
Parents are adults, but they're
parents
not
are
the ones-
referenced in here, but this is
They're not
more
the-
about what are we going to do as district employees, district leaders, that we think will move us from point B to point C.
Right, but the
This is-
intent was adults within the school district system.
Yes,
Not
correct.
adults outside the school district system.
For the most part,
All right,
correct.
I just wanted to clarify what you meant by adult.
That's what I mean by adult actions. If that's not clear, I'm happy to change that wording.
I happen not to like it, but,
Yeah, I mean,
All right.
a district is sort of this amorphous thing. So we wanted to clarify what were the adults, going to do to help the students to achieve these high
right, or staff in the
goals.
district, or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yep.
The review process, on page 8 as well, part 3. You're going to prepare a public update on the progress of the student performance indicators and the specific actions completed during the previous year. That's going to be a public update. Is there any intent, or do you mean there's going to be any type of presentation to the board or some sort of feedback from the board in that process? Or is that just a public update?
Well, I think that the board usually, when we do public updates of things or make presentations, the board is, of course, welcome to weigh in on it, and usually does. I would expect that they would. So it wouldn't simply be I would expect this to be something that we do at a board meeting as opposed to a report that simply is issued to the board, if that's what you mean. So the board could have some discourse on it.
Right.
And we could say, I mean, it's not unlike, in some ways, what we do now when I give you a year's worth of initiatives, and then we get close to the end of the year, I sort of go through them all and explain where we've been with them, and sometimes we don't get them all done, and we have to carry them over to the next year, and that could happen here.
Mr. Vanderveen,
Well,
can I
Go ahead.
clarify for a second? Most of these data points are measured on an annual basis. I mean, what the graduation rate is and all that stuff. Not all of them, but most of them. So if you were to look and say, this is the month where 80% of the data will be known, what month would it be good for this board to say, this is the month every year that we're looking at the plan? That's
Can
where
determine
you're,
that.
Yeah.
that's where you're getting to.
No, not necessarily.
Isn't? Okay, I'm sorry.
Getting to whether or not, do you believe this to be like a working document or a living document where it's revised or reviewed every year and modifications are made depending on how well you're improving the district or student performance?
Yeah, I'm not sure that every year you'd want to make changes. The way I've typically done this is you'd like to see 2 full years of implementation and 2 years worth of data after your baseline, and sort of put a stake in the ground at that point and say, okay, how are we doing both on the implementation side and on the student performance side? Do we want to stay the course on what's left in the plan? Do we think we need to adjust? But that's a pretty extensive process to go through. So that would get you probably at the midpoint of the plan. And then I think that one of the things that I think we'll wrestle with on this, and this could happen even after year 1, is we really need to add the SBAC testing into this plan somehow. I mean, that's a big public reporting on it. But we really need to get a year of baseline data under our belts and maybe even 2 years before we, get in there and have a realistic idea what the targets are. So that's something that could be added in, and then based on what we're looking at, other performance indicators could be removed because they're redundant, or they could simply be added to it. But I would think more of a full-on review, I would say once in the, at sort of the midpoint, but it could be tweaked on an annual basis. Nothing that prevents it. I would say, just in response to Phil's question, I think that this probably would be something that would be something in the early fall reporting. So much of this data is coming in at the end of the year that it would probably take us most of the summer to gather it all and get it all into the right place. You're talking about graduates and how many credits they've achieved in certain levels and breaking it down, and summers are probably a better time for us to do it, so we'd come back in the fall, not in August when people are away, but maybe, one of the September meetings. Those tend to be lighter meetings anyways, just in terms of business. That's probably a good time to review, here's the previous year, here's how we did, and here's where we stand on the student performance indicators. That'd be my thinking right now, but we really got to live this for a year before we can decide.
All right.
Does that help?
Yeah.
Mr. Vanderveen, I've been looking at kind of like
All right,
15
can I
minutes if I
come
can
back
get
at
to the
some
next
point?
board member, so I will come back to you. Mrs. Maxon Kennelly.
Okay, so I'm trying to organize my notes by Mr. Dreyer's 3 categories of clarification, keeping, and change. So under clarification, I had 5 questions, which I think I can move through quickly. On page 18, with number 14 regarding the school climate survey, given our mission and goals regarding citizenship and community service, I was wondering if clarifying regarding which specific questions you were focusing in on. I can't remember at this point, and I apologize, how broad safety, social, emotional well-being, and citizenship are, how many questions are encompassed by that. So is it really all of them? Are there a few specific targets in there?
we'd have to go back. I have not looked at that, to be honest with you. We'd actually, what we'd have to do, and we'll have to do this actually as part of gathering the baseline data, no, to Andrea, is we're going to have to look at that survey and identify, okay, here are the, here's the questions that fit this part of the mission, here's the questions that fit this part of the mission, here's the questions, and we can tell you what they are. But we were trying to match up the school climate survey with the district's mission. And I just can't tell you right now exactly which questions match up, but we'll have to do that research.
Okay.
Yeah, come on up. If I go off the rails, pull me back on.
If you remember in the school climate survey, and if you go back into that paperwork, the school district climate team organized all of the 100-some-odd questions into 5 domains.
Right.
So you could see the questions encompassed in the safety and social and emotional safety domain. So we selected from the student survey the domains that we thought spoke most to a student's perceptions about safety, climate, citizenship, those areas of the mission. So you could go back into that document and find those questions to get a sense of the questions that are in those domains.
So would you guess that there actually might be some change here in terms of if it proves to be too wide a scope, that you might narrow in on a few that especially tie to the mission goals, or do you really think it'll be all of them from that section?
The feeling of the group at this point is that it would be the aggregate of all of them from that section, because they touched on a number of different topics. But certainly I would leave room for the district climate team to think about that and review that again before the next iteration of the survey. But at this point, they really felt like those questions captured that social and emotional learning domain, which is so large compared to just a single question or 1 or 2 questions.
Okay. Thank you. My second question, actually, and I cut it down to 4. I moved one of mine to a possible change. On page 24, I had a question on 1.7 regarding independence. What was intended by that?
Andrea, come on back up.
Oh, sorry.
The full specific action says establish and implement a pre-K-12 scope and sequence for embedding executive functioning, study skills, and independence into all curriculum areas.
Yeah, this is about looking at those underlying skills to being a lifelong learner, that piece of the mission. So it's about teaching students everything from self-regulation, self-management, and building toward that ultimate independence of going off to college and beyond college to life as an independent learner. And so our job, our task, is to take a look at how the whole developmental sequence of that. How do we start at pre-K and each year develop levels of independence that are age-appropriate, developmentally appropriate, leading to that ultimate goal of the lifelong learner. Because it's not just about teaching reading, writing, and mathematics. It's about using that to learn new things, to innovate, to create, to participate. And those are the skills that are embedded in executive functions and self-management and regulation.
Okay. I guess the other ones were the ones I was comfortable with. I just wanted to check on what was intended by independence. I don't know if you're next yet, so let me go to the next one. On page 25, I had a question on 1-23 regarding what was intended for reviewing and revising district guidelines regarding homework.
Not me.
Not her. I think that's something that probably hasn't been looked at in a long time, and there's been a lot of recent research on
Yes.
homework. And it's a very interesting mixed bag, as a lot of educational research is. And so it's not necessarily that there's like a major issue with it now, but it's something that hasn't been looked at. And I think the question of what should be the proper work kids do at home versus what they do in school is really up in the air now, like it never has been. So you're familiar with, but others may not be familiar with a term called the flipped classroom. In the flipped classroom, students are actually given the content, sometimes in a video, sometimes online, given the content to learn at first pass at home, and they practice with the content in the classroom with the teacher's assistance, which is flipping what you normally do But it allows, in some cases, a more efficient way to teach the curriculum because the kids already come in with some background knowledge, and the teacher then can build on that knowledge. And it's not that every teacher should be doing the flipped classroom or anything like that, but it's something that we need to look at, and that's just one example. What should the role of homework, be? It's been around forever, and it's something that we feel that if we have a group get together and look at the latest research on that we might be able to get more learning out of kids if they do more learning at home, because there's a finite amount of time they have at school. We're not really going to increase that dramatically. There's some proposals in here to give some kids extended learning time. So it's not that we're giving up on the time at school, but the notion that there might be a more effective use of kids acquiring information and doing that outside of school, but still having the teacher make sure that they have it right, that could be fruitful for us. So that's what that means. It's not to suggest that, kids need, twice as much homework as they're getting, or, they don't have enough, or they have too much, but it's a big issue.
I guess, yeah, so my point had been, I didn't know if you had something specific in mind that was behind this, or if it
No.
was, as it said, let's look into research and kind of bring it up as a new question. So, thank you.
Yes.
Last question for clarification was on page 28, 4-17. I was wondering if you had some vision in mind behind the academic. The non-academic was clear to me because of the number exploring extracurricular opportunities of all of the different categories. I was wondering if there was something behind this, or this is another one we're looking into how to do this one.
Yeah, I think it's open. A lot of these are open in the sense that we have a concept, and we think that if we explore this concept in some depth, that it really can help kids achieve, even more and meet the mission. And we feel like there may be some opportunities that we're missing in enrichment opportunities for kids at the K-8 level. We focus there because the high school is so differentiated, and kids move through in their own pace of the levels in the AP and the beyond the AP, that we focused it on the K-8. And the non-academic may not be necessarily clubbed. Sometimes it's an artificial distinction between academic and non-academic, so I got to be careful. But you could be looking at enrichment opportunities in family consumer science in grades 7 and 8 that we don't have. I mean, we're not limiting this to simply reading, writing, and math. That's the idea of the non-academic. But it also could include, music and the arts and sports. So we want to take a look at that and see, for kids who say don't qualify for the gifted program, but could benefit. I mean, all kids can benefit from enrichment opportunities, no matter where you are on the academic scale. I always felt like we could gain some traction there in a pretty effective way. That was the thought behind it.
Okay,
a
thanks.
lot of these, I mean, just generally, a lot of these are not fully formed, like there's a set path on this. A lot of these are, we know we need to, we believe that if we do something with this effectively, it will make a substantial contribution towards the mission. But we're still not sure of the exact steps to get there. There's no predetermined outcome
Right.
in really any of these. And so that would be up to whoever's in charge of putting it all together. That was our thinking on that one. But a lot of them are in that sort of, there's no hidden agenda, but it's something we think could be fruitful for the district.
Thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Llewellyn, followed by Mrs. Gerber.
Perfect, thank you. In terms of process, are we going to be setting targets on the plan prior to its being finalized, or are we finalizing a framework without specific targets?
The answer, in my view, is what we're hoping to do is to bring back to you our target is for the second May meeting. I think it's the 18th, 19th. That meeting, we're hoping, this isn't like even a first reading because the plan is not complete.
Correct.
So what we're hoping is to give you a complete plan that would include baseline and targets for the May 19th meeting, so that when you vote on a plan, the plan is not just the framework of what we're going to do, but it has the baseline and it has the targets where we can gather baseline data and set targets, okay? So some of these will have to be not available at the present time, right? So, for example, the graduate follow-up survey, we can't give you anything on that. Right? But we are in the process, that's our work right now. We have a whole team working on this, and the district data team is working on this, of going through and identifying all the baseline data. Most of it, fortunately, does reside at Infinite Campus, so we think it's fairly accessible. And so what we're going to do is we're going to lay that out, and then once we have all the baseline data, then we'll set proposed targets in each of those, and the goal would be to bring that back, and that would be the full plan, with the possible exception of, somewhere we don't have any baseline.
Okay, that's actually good, because my next question was, you had stated that we need 2 full years of data to be able to measure. So I'm assuming that, X percent of these are going to have 2 years of history, so we can start measuring immediately, as opposed to waiting 3 years before we get anything quantifiable.
Oh, no, you'll have something quantifiable each year.
Okay.
What I was
Starting
suggesting, yeah.
the next year.
Yeah, so what would happen is, we will give you the baseline data. So let's pick something like attendance.
Okay.
That's a fairly easy one to grasp.
Right.
Right? So we look at attendance at the K-5 level, and for the 14-15, that's the year we're in, right? 14-15 school year, average daily attendance at the elementary level is 94%, and the high school is 93%, or whatever, right? And we say, we're going to set a 5-year target of we want the elementary one to be 98%, okay? And so at the end of next year, 15-16, we would calculate the attendance again and say, here's where we stand.
Okay.
In other words, actually add a column in here. So we would have, eventually what we'll do with this is you'll have a column called baseline data.
Right.
And then another one called target, and then each year we'll fill in what you get. So you get the data every year. What I was suggesting was that I think before we sort of abandon some of our actions because we're not getting good enough improvement, we ought to wait to see 2 years of change. In other words, attendance goes from 94 to 94.5. I wouldn't want to say, well, let's dramatically do something different. Let's stay the course on that, see what happens the next year. Now it goes back to 94. Now we might want to say, okay,
That's
it's
fine.
not working. Do you see what I'm saying?
No, my concern was that we were going to start measuring immediately.
We're going to
rather
start
than
measuring
3 years from
immediately.
now. Okay, good.
Yeah, and reporting every year.
Right, okay,
Immediately.
good.
Yeah. It's a
okay.
project.
How are we going to obtain kind of the towns and parents' input on the document? I know part of, the guideline that comes down from the state is that it's a partnership and that we've got input. Are we going to hold a special meeting to solicit kind of, our quote-unquote clients' input prior to this going finalized? As, they're the ones with the kids in the system?
Yes, this has been on it'll be on 2 more agendas before we vote on it. And in between that, I've been looking at scheduling another one of those broad agenda meetings that we had on a Saturday in public television, I guess now. The only thing that's been holding me back is that our second grandchild the date of that birth was not yet set. And if I said I can't go there because...
You can't fix that, Phil?
No. So that date is now set, so now I
you did.
no, I did.
He had a target and he met it.
Exactly.
Right.
It's a cesarean, so therefore it is set. So now I'll be looking at a date that I'll be circulating with people to say, here's the date. The last time we met, Saturday seemed to be good for some people. We may want to try a nighttime meeting during the week to see if that would bring in different people. And so I'll throw out some dates that make sense and see where we are.
Perfect.
So that is part of the plan prior to the June vote that we're assuming we would be taking on this final document.
Okay, perfect. And to kind of go back to one thing that Ms. Lou McCormick said, which was that we should really be putting in here school-level data. I think the point of the discussion is that as a district, we can be doing exceedingly well, but we can have a individual school that is failing, and as a board, we won't know that that's occurring unless we have the measurements at a school level. We may not need to set targets, but I think the data absolutely needs to be reported on a school-by-school basis. If we look at page 22 for a second, please, we talk about actions. I'm in the last paragraph. Specific actions as planned commits the school system to undertake this action sometime during the life. Are we going to have intermediary steps? Are we going to set targets as to priorities up front? I understand that we want flexibility as a district, but these are long-term objectives. So I'm wondering if we're going to be prioritizing and targeting.
Well, yeah, and having implemented several of these, I could tell you it's more of an art than a science. I will say that we need to, one of the reasons that disclaimer is in there, for lack of a better way to describe it, is I don't want people reading this and saying, oh, that's happening next year, all right? Oh, it's been 2 years, that thing hasn't started yet. So that people understand that, we're committing to doing these at some point during the life of the plan. I don't know necessarily what the most logical sequence is to do it, but one of the most important things in implementing a plan, it's actually more important to implement the plan than to write it, is to make sure we don't overtax the capacity of the people in the district who still have to do school every day. And we are often biting off more than we can chew. In fact, every year I give you a list of initiatives. I caution the district leadership and central office leadership team to don't have as many, try to be more realistic, and they keep pushing it. And then, as you know, every year there's some we have to carry over. So what I'll try to do is balance it out. So there's a mix of some new with some continuing, but we wouldn't want to do, all of them in, strategy 1 and none of them in strategy 4. So you really want to have some thought about what's the system's capacity to get that work done for that year. And I don't think it's a good strategy to try to lay them out for each year of 5 years, like up front. This is a year 5, this is 4, this is 3, because you just don't know what's going to happen when you start in year 1. It's too difficult. So we would look at these in terms of, obviously, they're, ones that are most critical, but also ones that are, that in the aggregate we can actually do.
Okay.
That's the whole thing. So it's more of an art than a science to it. But certainly, as we go through the review process, I'm certainly welcome to hear from individual board members if you think something really looks juicy to you. I mean, that's sort of the second question that we were going to go with, is what looks particularly promising. I can't guarantee that we could take all of them. You all may have 9 different ones that you all think are really important. But certainly, if it were the will of the board that something be accelerated rather than put back in the plan, we could certainly try to look at that. Okay. I just have to make sure we don't overextend.
Okay, thank you. And page 24, 1-2, implement a K-12 sequence of experiences supporting the development of skills leading to a successful capstone experience at the high school level. What does that mean?
Okay, thank you. That is a bit wordy. So we are proposing that every student have what's called a capstone experience prior to graduating from high school. Okay. Capstone experiences tend to be summative in nature, interdisciplinary in nature, require extensive research, communication. They could be electronic, they could be written, they could be video, but something of interest to the student that crosses over multiple content areas, that kind of puts it all together and shows deep and rigorous thinking. That's sort of my basic, and this is something that is in the state high school reform legislation that was passed a number of years ago, that it keeps getting postponed. But as we looked at it, we said to ourselves, well, even if the state continues to postpone it, this is a really valuable experience for all kids to have prior to graduation, all students. And so even if the state doesn't require it, we would like to have it happen.
So would it be its own course?
Okay, so that's the capstone experience. That's the second part.
So would it be its own course, say senior year for a
No,
grade?
not necessarily. It wouldn't necessarily be a course. It could be something the student's doing independently. But the important thing is we can't just say next year all 12th graders are going to do it. You have to build the skills really from K up so that by the time a student gets to 12th grade, they have the capabilities to do it. Now, it doesn't mean we're going to wait 12 years to implement it. But you might look at some mini capstone projects happening in grades 8 or grades 5 as sort of, trial runs of this sort of integrated learning. So operationalizing this, some high schools have done it in a variety of ways, I guess, is what I'm saying. So it wouldn't necessarily be a course called capstone. It'd be more like an independent study. And it could, different places have put it under the auspices of different departments, and that would all have to be worked out. But no, I don't think I would see it as a course. It also could be something that gets embedded in certain courses, senior year. So, there's a lot of ways to slice this one. And the reason it says 3 years is that it's a big nut, and we'd want to say maybe even build in something, in the 9th grade year and the 10th grade year into the curriculum. And we are also going to be looking at graduation requirements. So it's all sort of tied together in one. But capstone's sort of a term of art that we probably should more clearly define in the document somewhere, because I don't think it's really defined well, and
Right.
I think it's a good pickup in terms of what's that.
So, thank you. And then, to follow up on a comment by Ms. Kennelly earlier about the change in homework and the flipped classrooms.
Yep.
In order to properly implement flipped classrooms, where I've heard they're really successful, is when they're targeted kind of at the level of the individual class. Do you plan on restoring levels as part of going to the flipped classroom so that you can keep pace in a smaller group rather than in a larger group?
There's no assumption about anything in that. That's wide open. There's nothing that says anything about levels in that proposal. I mean, in the flipped classroom, I only used as an example. The broader thing is homework or work done outside of school by students. So could a teacher potentially say, okay, I've got 25 students in this class. You 8 are going to do this work outside of class. This other 8 is going to do a different work outside of class. The other 9 are going to do something else. And when you come in, we're going to do different things with it. That could happen within the context of a classroom. So anything's possible with that. I think the whole issue of can we make better use of what students do at home in terms of their learning. I used to use flipped classroom as one example.
Okay. And will those individual concepts be coming before the board, or will they just be rolled out?
Too early to tell.
Too early to tell. Okay. Thank you. Page 26, some definition around 2-6, which says develop capacity at the Walter Fitzgerald campus to attract students from other school districts on a tuition basis. If I recall, we added an administrator and eliminated a teacher position there during the budget process. Yet this was never really stated that you wanted to expand that at that time. What's the thought on expanding it? What is the business plan? What are the costs? What are the alternatives? What's our building capacity? I mean, have we done an analysis, or is it premature to stick this into a strategic plan?
Yeah, so here's where this comes from. That campus, that school, has, in my view, and not just in my view, tremendous untapped potential to really do a fabulous job of educating kids who aren't successful in the regular traditional high schools. It's a regular-sized school, it's basically the size of an elementary school. We don't nearly have the number of kids in there that we could have in there. And it could be really a lighthouse school for how to reach kids and really get them to excel that we don't currently do. Now, we've made some improvements there. We've made tremendous use of technology, which allows kids at that campus to take courses as challenging as calculus. That was never able to be done before, because when you have one math teacher, it's very hard to do all of that. So we believe that there is a lot of untapped capacity in there, and whether or not it ends up being, in my view, that if that school is really, really doing its thing and is really knocking the ball out of the park, then I think we're going to see other districts want to send kids to this school. They're going to want to send kids there rather than pay another provider maybe a lot more money. But that's down the road. So we're looking at a concept here of really developing the capacity of that school. And to me, the target would be this school is so good that other school districts are knocking down the doors who don't have the ability to run this. Okay, a lot of schools, smaller school districts, some nearby, maybe up north or whatever, they don't have the resources to run a full-blown campus like Walter Fitzgerald campus. It's something that could be a tremendous benefit to the region, and at the same time, might be a tremendous benefit to our kids if we can expand our offerings, because if you're bringing in revenue from other towns, then you can expand your offerings to our kids. So that's the vision of it. There's really no firmly developed plan, and that's the idea behind this, is we really want to improve this.
So is
And that's what I would like to see, it be so good that other districts look at it as something that, hey, I want to send my kids there instead of some other place.
So is that school right now meeting all of your expectations in terms of our ability to educate the children who are there?
No,
It's not.
no.
So when we talk
It can
about...
be improved,
when we talk
as all
about-
our schools can be improved.
But when we talk about developing capacity...
Right.
Are we talking about developing the programs within it, or are we talking about expanding it so that it can take in kids from other districts? Because it
I'm-
sounds like that's more than 5 years out if we're not even at your expectations yet.
Well, I think that we're...
Concerned that this
we're-
is in here, obviously.
Yeah, we're improving. I think over the time I've been here, I've seen a lot of improvements made over there, and I think once we get an administrator over there, I think we're really going to see some acceleration. One of the reasons I think that campus hasn't grown professionally as much as maybe it could have is the fact that there's no real champion over there to really push it. There's nobody with a lot of juice, so it's basically, teachers and a dean, and as we described, part-time leadership. And I think that once we get somebody over there that can look at it, can look at what other alternative type high schools around the state are doing, what the best practices are, and really improve it, I'm talking about program improvement over there is the first step. And then once we feel like we've got a really solid program that can compete with what other districts do, then I think we would look at the possibility of opening it up. But we couldn't start doing that and charging tuition until it came to the board, because the board, by policy, sets tuition rates. So I couldn't just unilaterally next year say, oh, take people in. So my first stage on this is to really do program development on that campus, and I think having the administrator there will be the first step in that. And then I think, maybe it's more than a 2-year. Maybe I'm being too optimistic on that one. That probably will take a little longer. But developing the capacity won't take more than 2 years. Whether we can attract kids in 2 years, that's probably optimistic.
Before we
Mr.
develop-
Llewellyn, I'm trying to kind of pace so everybody has a chance to, do you have follow-up on this?
I
or-
do. Thank you. I'm just going to continue on this thought for a moment. Thank you.
Yeah.
My concern here is if we're going to be investing to bring kids in from another district into what doesn't meet our expectations yet, I really think that in Appendix A, we need to know what our measurements are. We need to set those objectives kind of up front so that we're not investing in something that may or may not be growing. We can get into the nuances of it later.
Okay, thank you.
We can come back. I've got other questions.
Okay, before I go to Mrs. Gerber, did you want to make a comment on this discussion that was
I do, because I don't think people are understanding what we mean by capacity. I think people are assuming that capacity means more kids. What we're talking about is increasing the capacity to become a true alternative high school, where we're not just a smaller high school with the same methods, but actually new methodologies, or not new to the world, but new to us methodologies, i.e. things like project-based learning, focusing in on the combination of academic learning and the social and emotional learning of kids. So when we're saying about that capacity, there's where we're trying to build capacity. If we do that well, we believe that there are many other students in neighboring areas who need that same kind of education whose districts can't do that. So if we revised this, I think people have an absolute misconception. This isn't about finding kids outside of Fairfield. This is about educating Fairfielders so well that there may be other kids who, in other districts, who districts would purchase the service. But that's not what we mean by capacity.
And I fully support what you're saying. What I was hearing, what I'm reading, is that we're expanding it to other school districts to raise money. And I fully support expanding the learning that's going on there, but I'm not sure that we need to run before we kind of block and tackle.
Yeah, I would not see us even offering it as an option to students outside the district until we invest in it. And in our own district plan, this was just simply that idea of becoming a beacon to others, but by doing it so well for our own.
This may be a sentence that makes sense to the inside baseball people, but
Right.
probably needs to be clarified, yeah.
Okay. We'll
Mrs.
go look at the
Gerber.
wording on that.
Mrs. Gerber.
Yeah, okay, I had a question on page 25. It's 1-24, implement a revised middle school schedule. If there's just some more detail to
Sure.
that, just some more specificity, thanks.
Yeah, and I have a couple middle school principals sitting back there, would love to weigh in on this as well. I don't think there's any, like, large necessarily overhaul that we're looking to turn the thing completely upside down. I think there's a couple issues that we need to look at there. One has to do with looking at well, the right term would be unified arts rotation and the courses that are offered in the unified arts rotation in grades 6, 7, and 8, and specifically on how they align to the courses that kids go into at the high school. And so, you know, the current system that we have there has been that way for a long time. The courses do get reviewed as part of the curriculum review. It's not like, you know, family and consumer science is taught at the middle school, and when that curriculum is reviewed, it's reviewed. But the current system is, make sure I get this right, Gary and Meg, that kids basically rotate through in 6th and 7th grade into a set of 4 in each grade. And then in 8th grade, they choose among the different options, right? And first of all, the question is that the right model? You know, should we have it be, you know, that's sort of a middle position. Should we do something where kids have more choice, or should kids have less choice? So that's one area that needs to be explored, as well as, are we teaching the right classes in those unified arts areas? You know, one of the courses I think that we're looking at, what's the one that, is it computers? Computers. Okay, the fact that we have a course called computers tells you something already. Okay? That's a little dated. All right? So is that like the best course in the unified arts rotation? I think that some of them are no-brainers, and we're required to teach health every year by statute, and health is taught every year. Nodding back there, yes. Meg was a health teacher, I think, right? Health and phys ed, so she's nodding, okay? And so we're obviously going to have health every year somewhere in the schedule. But there's some other choices that can be made in there. The whole thing, remember the whole art discussion we had about kids go into 9th grade and foundations and splitting the foundations into 2. The question of, do we try to do something with the middle school art in such a way that kids maybe don't even need foundations? Maybe 9th grade they can go right into a different course. You know, that's something we want to, you know, potentially explore. What do you guys, is there anything else that's on the table? Gary or Meg, you want to talk about that? That's just one area.
Right,
know,
and you do
so-
have, the 1-25 specifically mentions the unified arts, but I guess my
Yes.
question was just what other than the unified arts when
Yeah,
you
well,
say
the
the middle school
schedule,
schedule?
but it's all tied together.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
those two might get merged and done in
Okay.
the same year.
Okay.
But I do want to highlight unified arts, but, you know, could be other, do you guys want to talk about other
Yeah.
considerations?
Yeah, I think that it's fair to say the current schedule that we have predates all of us. It's been around a long time, and we really haven't taken a hard look at it. The middle school administrators and some teachers have been looking at this for a couple of years. We now have a new high school schedule that we are looking at, and we're feeding into that. So it's really how we use the time that we have. We have them for this amount of minutes every day. Are we using it most efficiently in 2015? The schedule was developed many, many years ago. The unified arts piece is one of the components that we're looking at. One of the things we're a little bit excited about is, at least I am anyway, is I'd love to see perhaps something related to a business course or something like that that feeds into the high school. But, you know, we're just looking at those kinds of options for unified arts. But I think we're also looking at the whole schedule at the middle level in terms of time. And we're just at the beginning of that, but I think it's long overdue that we take a hard look at what we're doing at the middle school level in terms of how we use the time. Right now, they have 7 periods, broken up, 43 minutes each. Is that the best way to be utilizing the time in 2015?
Meg?
The only thing I would add to that, and I would echo Gary's thoughts on instructional time and maximizing that in the middle school, along with thank you for your support in world language in our budget process. If we implement that in 6th grade, that would implement the 6th grade schedule as well. So again, as Gary mentioned, we have a team of teachers and administrators that are looking at schedule, and once we get closer to the budget being finalized, we would meet again as an administrative group to sort out what the optimal schedule would be.
There's another part to that because this also ends up on here because I have a 6th grader. So, there's also a tradition there, I don't know if it's at all the grades, but the day starts with SSR. I don't know if SSR is still the best use of time, given that kids are expected to read at home.
Again, in looking at blocks of time.
I'm saying that nicely.
Yes, I know you are.
Okay.
Even homeroom, for example, is
Right.
X amount of minutes. We're talking as a group, do we need that much time to take attendance? Do we possibly need another minute to add it to our passing time? Do we need less time? Whatever that may be. So
Right.
SSR varies from school to school, but we are looking at the schedule as a whole.
Right, and I think also there are other needs that we have now that we didn't have several years ago, and the issue of intervention time, expanding, even like we talked about the gifted program, it kind of rolls into that a little bit, and enrichment opportunities. Are there other ways we can use the time that we have, whether it's the SSR time or that homeroom time, reconfigure the blocks of time so that we can do more of those things? And actually, that will help meet many of those other objectives that are in the plan, which we really can't do as well with the given schedule, perhaps, so.
I personally like SSR, but my daughter's going to be out of middle school in a year, so I guess that's not really going to change anything. And then I guess just while you're here, the other question I had was about the middle school advisory program. Just what exactly?
Yeah, that actually kind of goes to the same discussion. Advisory is a process that's also part of the secondary school reform that was on the docket a number of years ago. It goes along a little bit with student success planning, and Dr. Boyce has been working with that and getting that up to speed, but a component of that is advisory. And advisory basically means that every child in the school will be working with an adult in a small group that focuses on a variety of advisory activities. It might be career planning, it might be some health-related types of activities, social emotional support, but there's a connection, sort of an explicit connection that's made for every child in the middle school with an adult in that school that would be responsible for that. So for example, if they're homeroom, there might be an additional teacher, a homeroom helper, if you will. So that homeroom of 22 would be, split 11 and 11, and those would be advisory groups of 11, and there'd be topics that they would explore focused on a variety of things like career planning, future success, possibly some health-related activities, that sort of thing.
It's actually an extension of what we put in at the high schools. They have advisory at the high schools, and it's
Right.
really
Yeah, I just was wondering if it was similar.
similar to that structure.
It is, it is.
They actually use a lot more adults than just the teachers.
Yeah,
Because I know at the high
absolutely.
school level, the headmasters have an
Yep,
advisory, the
yep.
housemasters have an
All
advisory.
the adults do
Right.
it, yeah. It would be a similar thing, and,
Currently, a lot of that is delivered through our developmental guidance, which is done through our school counseling program several times a year. But think about when we're envisioning the possibilities of a new schedule, a possible flex block, whether it's weekly or monthly, that is an opportune time to have a perhaps set curriculum in this area.
Right, so it would basically be similar to, except, different on a middle school level as to what the high school
Developmentally
advisory.
It would involve
Okay.
all staff.
Yep.
Okay, great, thank you. And then I don't have any more middle school questions.
Thanks.
Thank you. Let's see, page 27, 4-3, develop and implement a new teacher academy to build capacity of all non-tenured teachers. I was just curious to get more information on that.
Yeah, I haven't talked to Ann Leffert on this one, and we do, I think, an excellent job of orienting our new teachers to the district. We have a 3-day orientation in the summer. We participate, every new teacher gets a mentor through the TEAM program, TEAM. They have to successfully complete modules in that. But a lot of that's done in the first year or two. And our non-tenured teachers are here for 4. And this is really a retention strategy. We want to embellish that, embellish is the wrong word, improve that, and really put together a systematic plan for all new teachers who come into the district from pre-service, in the summer, all the way through their achievement of tenure. So we don't say after a year or two, okay, you completed team, check, you made it through the first couple years, check. Now you're on your own. So we were trying to put something together a little more formally so that we really maximize the capacity of our newer teachers. And this could be teachers that are new to the district. They may be experienced teachers. So these needs could be highly variable. If you're an experienced teacher and you taught somewhere completely different than Fairfield, there's a learning curve to working in Fairfield, even if you're an experienced teacher. So we're looking to have a really full-blown, differentiated new teacher academy, we call it, that we would expect that all non-tenured teachers would go through, that's longer and more substantial than what we're doing right now. What we're doing right now is good, but I think there's room for improvement.
So I guess this would be instead of what you have right now?
It would be
or-
building on what we have right now.
Okay.
We wouldn't get rid of anything we're doing right now. I think we've got to, I think you really saturate people, the 3 days of orientation at the beginning, some of which is school-based, some of which is district-based. There's only so much a new person can absorb before they start work. I mean, we hit them with every required topic known to man, and I think they're glazing over. But I think there's only so much you can do before they start. But then there's issues that come up as they go through, and they do have a mentor, but we want to just build on that and keep it going and stay on top of it. Obviously, a lot of the support for new teachers comes at the school level, but there's a lot of benefit, I think, to bringing together a cohort of teachers who all started at once, almost like a cohort of students going through, or a cohort of graduate students who are going through a doctoral program, that they periodically are brought back together as a group to discuss issues that are relevant to them in their second or third year. So we really wouldn't be ditching anything we're doing right now. I just want to extend it and expand it because I think, obviously, we want to make a serious investment in the folks we're hiring, and we want to maximize their chances for success as a strategy.
Well, I guess just, the question I have is, I guess just in terms of the amount of time spent, so is this would this be when they were supposed to be having professional development, or is this when they have like Tuesday meetings? Would they do this instead of that, or?
That's all up in the air.
Or it's all up in the air? Okay, so it's still
Right.
a work in progress, but that's, okay.
Right. I mean, right now, there's expectations that they do a lot of work after hours on this,
Right.
as part of it. And so it wouldn't necessarily be something that they're pulled out of their teaching assignment, to do. We wouldn't want to say pull them out of teaching necessarily, but we have to look at a lot of different options with this.
Okay.
But that's that's the conceptual path we're on.
Okay. And then this is my last question. The 3-3 on the same page 27, identify and train at least one teacher in each school to serve as a teacher leader. I mean, it's kind of the same, the teacher academy, teacher leader. So is this something that you've already kind of started with? It kind of,
Yes.
when you were talking about rounds and things like that,
Yes.
there was some, so this is just kind of an expansion?
This is an extension. This is under the
Okay.
leadership capacity strategy, right? Each of these is under a core strategy. And we talk about leadership capacity, we're talking about improving the capacity, not just of our leaders, formal leaders, and that's a big part of what we're trying to do here, but I really feel like this district has so many talented teachers in it, that if we could build the leadership capacity of teachers to help with all of these different initiatives, that the implementation would go really well and we could stay on top of a lot more than if we have an administrator trying to run around and do it all. So we've started it this year, or last year we started it, with Instructional Rounds, where I trained a whole bunch of teachers in how to facilitate rounds. They've been facilitating them in their buildings. We have cohorts of rounds facilitators. We're continuing to do more of that. And that was the beginning, and that was so well received, we started talking that, wouldn't it be great if we had something like that for all of our major initiatives, like a data team facilitation leader in every school. For example, some of the principals under rounds, they wanted to have a trained rounds facilitator at the elementary school in every grade level. So when they do grade level rounds, there's a trained facilitator in that grade level. The same thing can be true with data teams. So if you're having a data team discussion at a grade level, there's an expert facilitator right there who's a teacher. It doesn't have to be the principal. So that's the idea, is to take the big initiatives we have, sometimes we refer to them as the big rocks, and we say, can we build the capacity of teachers to lead these alongside with, and ultimately maybe in place of, some of the administrators. So, rounds of data teams come to mind as two examples, but there's others, that could happen. So that's the idea there, so that sort of sets like a standard that for each initiative, by the end of this plan, if not sooner, we want to be able to say, all right, we've got at least one teacher in every school who's the teacher leader for this initiative, and they'll get trained and they'll be able to lead.
Right, thanks.
Yep.
Ms. Carnell, followed by Mr. Convertito.
The walking wounded? Thank you.
Mr. Convertito first.
Just a couple of 1.6 and 1.8. You mentioned English language learners. And I don't see any of that in any of the assessments.
Yeah, it's such a small group that we didn't break out every subgroup in the big
Okay.
setting, but the reason they're in there is that when we look at the achievement gap in Fairfield, if we look at who are the kids, and we've shown some of this data to you, I think, previously. If you look at, if, let's just pick a number. If 85% of our kids are achieving at high levels right now, or 80%, whatever number you pick, who are the 15%? Who are the kids who are not achieving at the standards we're expecting? English language learners is one of the groups.
Right.
And so if we're going to meet the board's goal of 100% of kids achieving, we need to have something in the plan to address the issue of English language learners, also a growing population in the town. But it's currently only about 2% of our student population.
Okay.
So to try to put a measurement on it could be difficult.
The reason, my concern is that in looking at the measures column in Appendix A,
Yes.
it gives the impression that the free and reduced lunch plus the rest of the population equals the whole.
Well, actually,
And I don't know, I know there was some discussion of this, but when I walked in, so.
no, in many cases, what you've got is you've got two measures for the same, say, test. You've got the whole population,
Right,
and then you've got the subgroup of free and reduced. So it's not non-free and reduced, and to get the whole, you have to add them together. It's how are we doing as a whole as a district, and then a separate count for free and reduced, okay? So we're not saying, I mean, you could figure it out, but that's the idea. So we do want to measure, it's still important to measure how we're doing as a whole, 100% of the kids, how we doing. But we're targeting, and it's a proxy, because it's not perfect, but there tends to be a correlation between free and reduced status and lesser achievement. Not perfect, but that's why it's there. So it's not that you add the two together, right?
okay.
Yeah,
okay.
I mean, maybe I need to
It gives-
clarify that.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. It gives that impression, that's.
Right,
that was
all
what I
right.
was-
Well, maybe there's a way to,
Okay,
on the description, we can make it clearer that where it doesn't reference
okay.
free reduced, we're talking about, that's
Two
100%.
different groups, which may overlap.
There will be overlap, right.
Okay.
The free and reduced lunch is included in the whole.
Okay,
Then-
fine.
Okay.
Okay.
Good.
And if I bring up anything that was already discussed, just let me know and I'll review the videotape. 1-21 on page 25. I know we have sort of been talking about this on the peripheral revised high school graduation requirements. Is that going to be in response to state mandates, or is that our own initiative?
It's some of both, because the state mandates are in flux.
Okay.
We've got several issues all coming together, and we really want to sort it out once and not 3 different times.
Okay.
So you've got the issue of capped versus SBAC, and how you're going to use that in your graduation requirements, because that's a change. Plus, you've got some graduation requirements that are coming in the statute for the class of 2020. There's a proposal to make that 2021. But within there may be value in meeting those requirements, even if they end up never taking effect. So we really need to analyze the high school graduation requirements, see what the legislature does this year, look at the testing with the new testing scenarios, and bring together to the policy committee recommendation about new high school graduation requirements, because also we want to look at the total number of credits. It's not just the distribution of credits.
Okay.
And we also have this crazy way of counting credits that I learned when I got here. And Jen learned that the hard way early. We double count everything. So you'll see something like, to graduate from Fairfield Public Schools, you need, I forget what it is, 43 credits. And you go, oh my God, that's unbelievable. Well, that's because we count everything double. So if the requirement's 43, in the rest of the world, that would be 21 and a half. So we really need to just get the math back to a normal way. So it's a big package,
Okay.
but we're not ready to make a move on that, immediately. As I said with the capstone project, that's something that's in the statute, that even if that never gets enacted, we believe has tremendous value, and we would want to put it into the graduation requirements either way.
Well, since you brought it up, let's go there. When you talk about capstone, are you talking, or right now we have sort of a informal internship program at the high school. Is capstone aligned with that, or something totally different?
It'd be something, it could be aligned to it.
If it was more
It
rigorous?
could be, but it would not necessarily have to be. I could see a student, potentially, who is doing an internship and having an interest in an area, doing their capstone related to that.
Okay.
But I think that would be a bonus. I think that would be, nice, because you generally want capstone projects to be something of an interest to the student. But it isn't necessarily something vocational.
Okay.
Somebody could have a really deep passion about, Reconstruction under Andrew Johnson.
Okay.
All right. I don't know who would, but,
Pulled that one out of there.
right? I don't know. Pick something just to see if you're paying attention out there, right? And they could, And they could just dig into that and go really deep on that and do the research and conclude that, you know, if Lincoln had lived, Reconstruction would have been all different, okay? So it doesn't have to be vocational. Generally, the internships tend to be
Right.
somewhat vocational. Yeah, I might be interested in being a vet, so I'll go do the internship with a vet.
Okay.
Capstones don't have to be related.
Okay. 1-122 on 25. Is that similar to what we've done with the world language this year for sixth grade? Is that the same type of?
No, this one is another legacy. It actually may tie into 121. We have to decide whether to bring that forward all at once or differently. So what we have right now is we have a technology requirement that basically is a credit requirement. There's a course that kids have to take and pass called Computer Information Systems.
Right.
Okay? There's other ways of passing it. A lot of kids, they don't have room in their schedule for it, and so they take it during summer school.
Or they just take the test?
Or they take the test. And so the more sort of modern way to think about that, well, there's several other more modern ways to think about that that may not require a course. Because when you have a course, you have to staff the course, and that also limits what those staff could teach otherwise. And so you've got a lot of kids, I think, you know, plodding through that course, and we just wonder whether the technology requirement could be met, say, by embedding technology in certain courses that kids are going to take, and if they pass those courses,
Okay.
or could it just be an assessment? There's a lot of choices there that can be made, but I think there's a lot of resources we're putting into that particular requirement. Or it could be that that course just needs to be spruced up and needs to be called something else, and it needs to stay as a requirement. That's what that's about.
So if my assumption is that 1-3 on the previous page is going to tie into that? Develop scope and sequence of
That would be
technology?
related to it.
Right.
That would be related to it. So we may be able to say, potentially, and again, this circles back to the middle school a little bit, if that computers course in 8th grade, say, were different, let's just say, we might be able to certify a kid in 8th grade. I mean, these kids are pretty technologically savvy. Might be able to give an assessment at the end of 8th grade and say, hey, if you pass this test at the end of 8th grade after this course, you've got your high school,
Okay.
you know, requirement met in that regard. Kids can show mastery of a high school course now and get it advanced, right? Like you can get Algebra 1, or you know, you can get other courses in the middle school. Maybe we can do it with technology.
Okay.
And again, that frees the kid up to pursue, you know, a passion.
Okay. Can you explain 26, 2-3, implement mixed-level observations for professional practice and peer conferences?
To improve vertical alignment? Did we
Yeah.
put enough jargon in there for you? Right. One of the real side benefits of doing instructional rounds is that we have teachers get involved in watching other teachers teach, not just other classrooms, but other levels. So we're talking about mixed levels. We're talking about high school teachers who are watching middle school teachers. We're seeing 5th grade teachers watch 2nd grade teachers. Whole groups of teachers watching 3rd grade teachers. That's mixed level. There's been a lot of benefit to that both ways. Elementary teachers or middle school teachers who've watched high school teachers. So they found a tremendous benefit to that, but we've never really tied it into improving the vertical alignment. In other words, we've identified the transitions as sticky points. It's in there separately, 5th to 6th grade, 8th to 9th grade, as areas we want to work on. And we really think if the high school and the middle school, for example, if teachers had the opportunity to observe each other teach. So, you know, you teach 8th grade math or Algebra 1 in 8th grade, and then you watch 9th grade, and you guys have a conference about it. We really think that could have a really beneficial effect on the experience kids have moving from 8th to 9th. And so that's the vertical alignment part, because we constantly hear that we want to make sure that we have good transitions. We work hard at it, but it can always be improved. So, and peer conferences are those two teachers talking together about what happened as opposed to an administrator being involved in it. So it's peer-to-peer teacher leadership, and it's going on in a small way now, but it's almost an offshoot of rounds. That's the concept.
Okay. Two more. 27, 4-4 through 4-6, 3 bullet points on common planning time. Is that an issue now?
Yes. Common planning time is something that teachers crave across the district at all levels. It's incredibly beneficial to get teachers to put their heads together and come up with better ways to teach kids and to look at data and so forth. Okay. And it is so hard to make it happen. The only level that's really consistently done it as part of the structure is the middle school because of the team concept. Right. But there, middle school teams are not subject specific. Right? A middle school team has 4 different content areas together. So they have common planning time, but they're all teaching different subjects. And if we're going to really benefit from the wisdom of the teachers, we need to create opportunities for them to share their practices with one another. I think one of the great opportunities this district has is its size, in the sense that we can take advantage of multiple teachers teaching the same courses like other districts can't. I mean, we might have, I don't know, let's pick a number out of the air, a dozen teachers out there teaching Algebra 1 across the district, between 8th grade and 9th grade and so forth. I mean, they all can bring something to the table about how to teach Algebra 1 better. They've got lessons, they've got units, they've got assessments, they've got ideas that have worked or not worked and that they can share with one another. But they can only share it if they can have time together to do it. And I really think that this district can really take advantage of the scale of things here that other districts just can't do. You know, we've got 225 elementary teachers, you know, with a lot of stored up wisdom. And so all of this is an opportunity to take advantage of that. But the reason that at the elementary level there's some common planning time, so that's why it says more. We're trying to get more. At the high school there's very little. And the third bullet on that is that we don't want to just put teachers together and say, here. We want to give them a common protocol that's research-based that said, when you have your common planning time, here's the most effective way to use it. Okay. Rather than lobbing a big, hairy problem into the room and saying, here, solve it. That's unlikely to yield any results.
Okay. And just my last, and it sort of picks up, I think Mr. Llewellyn alluded to it in his comments. In Appendix A, and nothing specific in Appendix A, but it would seem to me that you would have to break Appendix A down into what you can do 1 year and a second year and a third year, because in reading through it, it would seem to me that some of them build upon others. And is it possible to organize it that way?
So give me an example.
Well, graduation rates. What can you do in year 1 on graduation rates? I mean, it would seem to me that would be a year 2 type of.
Well, actually, that's something that we've already made progress on. That's why the governor came here and the commissioner.
Okay.
Right? Yeah, I mean, so I think that it's not necessarily the case. I think your larger point is a good one, if I understand it correctly. That, you know.
Are there some predecessors that need to be done?
Right. There's some of these where you might see the data not improve for a couple or 3 years.
Right.
Right? And that we're setting some improvements in motion that will pay off in graduation rate, but they're not going to pay off next year in graduation rate.
Well, okay, so here's an example. You have writing,
Yeah.
common assessments for grade 3.
Yeah.
My assumption is in year 3 is where we would see the most impact because you've done 1, 2.
Right.
Okay, and 3 all simultaneously, but
Yes.
3 is going to,
So so I think that's we'd report it out, but I think the expectation is, not necessarily, the world never works this way. You say, our baseline is 50, and we want to get to, 65 over 5 years.
Right.
Okay? So in some worlds, people would think, well, we've got to do 3 a year for 5 years, that gets us there. But in some cases, as maybe you're pointing out, it might be little progress the first couple of years, and then you're going to see a spike when it kicks in.
Right, because
so I think that's another reason why you don't want to sort of like abandon ship on something after maybe a couple years because you haven't seen the data move yet. It could be that it hasn't quite hit there.
Right.
I think that's when we look at the data, we might want to say, hey, that's something we would expect to see growth on maybe in a couple of years. Another one might be flat for 2 years, and you'd say, no, we should have seen growth in that by now. We need to make a move. So I think you have to be careful about that. But I think we'd want to report it.
Okay.
But I think we'd want to report it with the understanding that, you know, look, this was just the first year of trying something on it. We're not necessarily going to see big time improvement.
Okay. Okay.
Ms. Carnell?
I guess you saved the best for last, so. Dr. Title, I think this is a great document and a lot of, I guess for lack of a better term, a lot of dreams to be implemented. I guess the question is, in looking at this and reading it, how are you going to prioritize? And it just seems almost overwhelming, even over the course of 5 years.
I worry about that too. And I guess, and so does the team that helped me put this together.
Would you mind sharing the team so we know?
Well, there were a lot of hands in this, but we started this by asking the full administrative team, the 43 administrative team, to brainstorm as a group the very question of how do we fill the gap and what do we have to do? You know, dream about this. We set a very high bar, you know, and we gave them the criteria for the specific actions. You know, and we said, you know, to be a good specific action, it has to follow the criteria that are on page 23. So they couldn't just willy-nilly dream up something, you know, out of thin air. And they brainstormed it. And then we took all of those ideas and we sort of boiled them down, and we took them back out for another round with the administrative team. And then once we had them down to a more manageable number, took out the duplicates or the ones that just were, they didn't fit the criteria, let's put it that way. They were too narrow, or, you know, they weren't specific enough. We gave it to each principal and asked them to share this with their teachers. And we gave them some focus questions on there. We asked them which of these, because we also didn't want the teachers to freak out. We said, first thing is, look at these and tell us which ones of these are already extensions of existing initiatives. So that helps calm people down. And I think if you look at a number of these, probably half of these are continuation of the work that we're already doing, because we're not saying, hey, everything we did in the past is no good. We're starting over. This is a brand new day. Forget what you did for the last 5 years. We're not saying that. And so we asked the teachers to look at that, and I think that gave people some comfort. And then we asked them which of these seemed to be the most promising, and which are, we asked actually the same questions that Phil started with. What are confusing? What are most promising? And did we forget anything? Or, you know, is there anything on here you think we should strike? And we then came back as an administrative group and looked at the feedback from the teachers, and one more shot with the administrators. And then I compiled it and organized it, and you know, at the end of the day, it's my work, but it reflects the input of a lot of the staff members. But I think because a lot of it, when you look at it, it's deepening work already in progress, as opposed to something brand new. On the other hand, I want that reaction. I'm glad you said that, because if I give you a district improvement plan and you go, this looks all right, nothing too exciting here, you know, I want someone to say, oh my God, if we could do this, we would really have something, you know. And this is going to be hard. It's going to be hard work, and that's why I think it's important after a couple years of implementation to take stock of it and say, all right, how have we done on 2 years? We got 3 years left. Here's what's left to be done. Do we need to change course? Should we abandon some things we thought we could do? And there's no penalty for doing that. So they couldn't just dream up anything. It had to meet the criteria, and the criteria really is, will this action make a substantial contribution to meeting the mission and goals set out by the board? It may take a lot of resources in terms of time, but if it has a big payoff, it's worth it. So you're kind of in your head doing a little cost-benefit analysis, not so much on the dollar sign, but each of these represents an investment of time. So is the investment in time worth the improvement we're going to get from it? And that's a judgment. There's no magic way to do that. And that was our estimate on this. So it should be daunting. People should look at it and go, whoa, that's really new and so forth. And I'm glad you said that. But I'm concerned, obviously. That's why I'm saying that we would make sure that each year on an annual basis, we agree that we have the capacity to do something, and would ask your indulgence when you get the list for the first year and you go, well, how come we're not doing this one and this one and this one and this one, that we go back to this conversation that we only have the capacity to do so much at once. But I appreciate the point. It's well taken, and I think it could be that we've overreached, but I'd rather overreach than underreach.
I agree. I'm just going to pick an arbitrary point. On page 28, 412, it says, develop a plan to minimize the impact of teacher absences on student learning. I guess the question is, what are we going to develop? Like, if I look at this and I say, there's great ideas here, but how are we going to implement them?
Right. So all of these are basically areas where we feel that if we can make improvement in this area, that this can have a substantially positive impact on student achievement, right? Because it's all focused on student achievement. And in the last, 2 years in, we put in an automated, an online substitute. This is the first year. Years are merging in my head. We're actually now collecting data more than ever before on the number of absences, what the reasons are for those absences, flagging issues there, looking at things like, wow, we had way too much professional development scheduled on a certain day and we couldn't fill it with substitutes and so forth. So now that we have the opportunity to really gather data on absences and the reasons for the absences, we want to take a look at what can we do, knowing that there will always be absences for a variety of reasons. People are going to get sick. People are going to have personal issues that come up. People are going to need to be taken from their classes for professional development. But how can we organize that, number one, so it minimizes the impact on student learning? So that's the first question. And then the second thing is, are there different ways, are there some ways of deepening or being more creative about who we put in front of kids when the teacher is absent? We've tried some things. We have interns. We have what we'll call permanent building substitutes, right? We've gone back and forth on the interns. They're cost effective, but we've had some trouble getting them. Should we do more building substitutes so we have a bigger pool? We don't think we need to raise the rate for substitute teachers because Ann's been looking at that, but that could be in the mix. Or do we need some different incentives? Or do we need to completely outsource the substitutes? In some districts, they hire Kelly Services to do it. Now, it costs a lot of money, but they're kind of the experts there. So we need to do a cost-benefit analysis there. So I think there's two parts of it. One is, how can we minimize the absences themselves? And then secondly, given that we know there are going to be absences, what can we do to get the most qualified instructor in front of kids when somebody invariably is out?
And there are going to be absences. I mean, there's no doubt, or a leave of absence.
Yep.
I guess my question is more broadly based. There's so much here. How are you planning on implementing it?
Right.
I mean, you could take, 4.1, 4.2,
Well,
or page 2.
I don't think I added them all up, but take the number and divide by 5.
Okay.
All right? I mean, right now, if you think about it, we give you, I think the last 3 or 4 years I've been doing this, where I give the board the list of initiatives for the year. It tends to be in the neighborhood of 25 to 30 different initiatives. 32 this year. And, we may not get them all because my group is overachievers. And a lot of these are continuations of that. So we would pick them off. I would try to schedule them so that there could, some of these are harder than others. You wouldn't want to do all the hard ones at once. You don't want to do all the easy ones at once. You also want, in the parlance, some quick victories, right? Because we want someone to say, well, what did we ever get out of that district improvement plan? That's sitting on the shelf, whatever happened. You want to be able to say at the end of the year, in this district improvement plan, here's something tangible that actually came out of this. We don't want to have something that is going to, everything we do is going to take 4 years to show up. And how it works is really the same way that we do it now in terms of the responsibilities. Every one of those initiatives that is listed, there's a central office administrator or two who is primarily responsible for and accountable for implementing that. And they also have help. They help from principals, they help from other central office administrators. And there's a separate document that we use internally that says, all right, initiative 1, person responsible, Dave Title, helping everybody else, okay? So there's one in there this year, I think was on the long-range facilities plan. That's in there, all right? So you can pretty much guess who has that one on his accountability structure, okay? And he's sitting out there, all right? But he's also getting help on that.
Raise your hand.
Right, okay? So that would be the same with these. So we would say, who's taking this on? Now, we don't just assign these randomly like cards in a game. We sit around and we say, whose job responsibilities best line up with 4-12? And we all look around and say, Ann, right? Or Ann raises her hand and says, looks like that one's mine, all right? And then we go to the one, maybe there's the one on executive functioning, and Andrea says, you know what? I think that one belongs to me. And the one on technology, and Karen says, I guess that's me. And then the one on the middle school schedule, Meg Boyce will say, think that's me. And, by the end, there aren't too many orphans. And then, at the very end, it's like, all right, who doesn't have enough, and we go from there. So that's how we do it. It's actually a pretty good process, and that is built into their what we call, because you've seen it from me, mutual expectations, all right? And we do that with the administrative team as well. So it's part of their annual evaluation. Do they implement the initiatives they're supposed to do? So what we're doing here is we're merging the work of the improvement work with the job responsibilities of people already in existence. So it's not a complete new thing for them. Ann's always working on substitutes. We're just asking for more. She's already doing new teacher work. That would be a logical one for her. So by embedding the implementation right into the accountability structure and the support structure, we get a lot done.
There's definitely a lot to do. And forgive me, this may be addressed in here, but I know there was a page or so about English as a second language, for example, and I'm sorry, I don't know what.
English language learners.
Much,
Yeah, there's several.
it's in different, I think, different places or something.
It shouldn't be.
Well, no, I didn't mean it in a, I mean, it's.
Okay. I think the
it's
official
ref-
term now is ELL.
Thank you.
Used to be ESL, you're right.
Politically
Back
correct.
in the day.
I guess the question, and this may not be the right point of entry, is that's something that has come up and it's been addressed in this board, in the school district. And that's a very important item to address. But is there in this district plan addressing maybe different sort of students that may need other sort of help? Like maybe the student that's existing at a C, but under the right conditions can maybe be the B student.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe I missed it in this document. Maybe that's what they call levels, I'm not sure, but.
Well, no, it's not levels. This is, this plan is intended to address all the students in the district, all the learners in the district, not just, small subsets of learners. And it's hard to pick off every one of them because, you've got, there are as many different learners as there are students. And I think that a lot of these go to trying to meet student needs in different ways that we haven't met. There's a whole set in here, not a whole set in here, about trying to do some extended learning time for kids. Right now, we do that in a small way in different schools. We do it as part of Title I at some of our schools. It's done in various ways at the different schools where there's extended learning opportunities. But we haven't really really pushed on that one. You know, and for some kids, not all kids, for some kids who are, you know, performing at an average level but are capable of more, maybe the extra half hour of extended learning time, whether that's before school or after school or another time, or it could be a technological solution to that. Maybe that's what it takes to push that kid up over the bar. And there's been a lot of different work done around the state on extended learning time because the alliance districts, the 30 lowest performing districts in the state, have been getting a lot of extra money from the state. And a lot of them have had some success with doing some alteration of teacher schedules, for example, where some teachers might start work later and stay later, so you're not paying any more for the teacher, but that teacher's available for an extra hour or two after school, depending on, you know, what their schedule is. And we do it now a little bit in music, like a lot of the ensemble groups at the elementary schools. They come in early. That's a form of extended learning time. So it just feels like an area that we could reach a lot of kids with a lot of different needs through that. And so it's just very hard to, you know, isolate every different type of learner in a plan this, you know,
Exactly.
district-wide. But you know, we don't want to forget anybody, and knowing that the mission is 100%.
Is there is this, and I know it's getting late, can that be added to this? In going back, because I believe we have 2 more drafts of this, can that be something that you work with the administration and give it some further thought, that maybe how a little more of the whole?
Were you thinking of sort of, you know, flagging that in the narrative somewhere that, you know,
Right.
every single student, every single subgroup isn't identified in here, but
Right.
the goal is, yeah, I think I could think about some language around that, if that would help.
And if I had the answer, I'd be sitting in your seat, so I'm going to leave you.
If I had
to-
the answer, I wouldn't be sitting in this seat.
Right, so I'm going to, but it would be great if we could put something in.
Some language on that. We'll take a note of that. Thank you.
Thank you.
We are getting toward a time, but Ms. Lou McCormick, did you have a question you wanted to ask? And I think Mr. Fattabine might have had additional questions.
Yeah, on that topic of meeting all the needs, it kind of resonated when you were talking about the advantage of the economies of scale we actually benefit from by having such a large district. But in thinking about that concept, doesn't that also apply to our student population, not just the teacher population? And I know the topic of levels has been brought up at different points in time, and people are concerned about levels because they lock kids into a track. We don't like that. But the concept of flexible leveling, and why not, isn't that a way to create even more differentiation opportunity in a more efficient grouping process versus trying to cluster just everybody into the classroom where everyone's needs are kind of met, but not really fully met, anybody? As opposed to getting smaller groups of kids that have the flexibility to move to different groups as needed, but you get more differentiation. And given that we have such a large population of students, we should be able to do that better than anyone you would imagine. And I know a lot of the best districts in Connecticut and other states, they use it extensively, particularly in middle school and higher. And they started even in elementary school.
Well, that's a huge topic.
It is.
But I will say that there's a wide variety of ways of meeting the needs of all the different learners that we have, whether it's a small district or a large district. I believe that we have seen a lot of improvement in the way we've attempted to meet the different needs of learners in this district in the time I've been here and probably before that. There's lots of ways to do that. That may be one way to do it. But I will tell you my personal bias is I'm not in favor of creating additional formal tracks. I think we've got a pretty good balance of that right now. But, you know, I won't
Can I
be here
ask
forever.
why?
Well, we could go on this for 2 hours.
Well, no, I just want to hear your opinion. We've never really addressed this topic at the board, and I've been curious about this from the start.
Because I think that when you create fixed tracks too early, you label kids, you create issues of where students don't achieve, they get put in a lower track, that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and that maintaining high standards for all the students and giving them the support that they need to meet those standards is the better way to do it, rather than to create a lower group with lower standards that they never can get out of. And I believe that one of the reasons why we've seen such an improvement in our AP and more kids getting into AP is the elimination of the third level at the high schools, raised the bar for everybody in level 2, and said, you guys can do it, and we're going to give you the support to do it.
But we still have a level 3. So we'll always have a bottom track, don't we? I mean, so unless the dream is to have no tracks at all.
I'm not suggesting no tracks at the high school level. What I'm saying is that I think we have the right number of tracks at the high school. We do. We have honors AP, we have level 1, we have level 2. And I'm saying there used to be a level 3. There used to be another one below that. And the high school leadership team and myself and others don't think that putting that back in serves those students well. It creates a very low group of very difficult to manage classes, and it doesn't work well. And so we've done much better, and I think meeting, no matter how many levels you have, you're going to have heterogeneity in the classroom. And teachers have to learn how to manage the heterogeneity in the classroom of their learners, and you can never create enough tracks to do that. So I'm not saying detrack the high school, okay? I'm not saying get rid of tracks. I'm saying maintaining the number that we have now makes sense to me, but I'm not in favor of adding additional tracks at the high school, and I'm certainly not in favor of adding fixed tracks at the elementary school in any way, shape, or form. I think our teachers do an excellent job and continue to work on meeting the needs of all kids in the full group. And at the middle school, we do split into 2 for math, but I think the language arts, I'm very comfortable with having the 1 level in language arts. And if you look at, because we looked at this in the data team, when you look at a large spike that occurred in the reading and writing CMTs in 7th and 8th grade, it coincides with the de-leveling of the middle school. So it actually improves student achievement. So I'm not saying go back on levels. I'm not saying de-level math at the middle school. The only way I would de-level math at the middle school would be to say every kid does Algebra 1 in 8th grade. Nobody's getting out of middle school without doing Algebra 1. I'd go there before I went, in the other direction.
But can I ask you, do you think it's okay for kids not to be good at algebra? I mean,
I don't think
are some kids just better at art or better at sports or better, like, does every child have to be excellent at everything?
Does every kid have to be excellent at everything? I think there are certain core skills and abilities that we want every child to have when they exit from us. And so, therefore, I think there is a common curriculum every child should get. However, they don't necessarily go through it they don't all have to be excellent at algebra at the same time, okay? Which is why, at this point, every kid gets to algebra. Some kids get to algebra, these sequential courses like algebra and Algebra 2 and so forth. Those are the ones where it makes sense to break them off. And so at this point, I'm not in the camp of Algebra 1 for everybody by 8th grade, because I'm not sure all kids really are ready for Algebra 1 in 8th grade. But at the same time, their curriculums are merging, and I'm not sure there's that much difference between regular math and advanced math in the middle schools as there used to be. We've really cranked up the expectations in what I'll call the regular track. It's not easy math. So I think that all kids can be successful. All kids can master algebra. It's just they're not all going to master it at the same time. I'm not sure that you would expect every kid to be excellent at everything, but they need to be proficient at the core skills and knowledge in order to be successful citizens, and I think we've tried to define that in our curriculum and so forth. But I just think there's a variety of ways to meet different needs. I'm just telling you personally where I feel educationally and philosophically, I'm not looking to add levels, I'm not looking to subtract levels. I think we just need to do a better job of our instructional practices within the levels that we have. I think that's a more fruitful move than thinking that adding levels will fix the problem.
And let me just add, when I say levels, I definitely don't mean fixed tracks.
Okay.
The concept was flexible levels. And when we talk about levels, I'm actually not talking about abilities, but more, as you mentioned, the difference in timing that kids become able to do it. And the more we're able to cater to different kids' needs, the better. So if one kid is able to, let's say, be incredible scientist by 5th grade, but another one doesn't mature until 9th grade, do we make the 5th grader wait until 8th grade to do it? And do we force the one who would have been better off waiting until 9th grade to have to do it by 8th grade? And so by that I mean that, have we considered, and I would love to see it somewhere in this, the discussion of being able to benefit from the economies of scale we have from such a large district with so many students, that we could actually create a much broader scale, because there's probably many students, many more students than in a regular district who might mature later, and many more who might mature earlier for different topics.
I guess, okay, what comment on that, then I'll stop.
I want to get to Mr. Fattabine.
Okay. You know, in an ideal world, you could differentiate the entire educational program for every kid. It's really not something that we're able to do, and there's also intellectual maturity and there's social emotional maturity, and while a student may be, say, intellectually able to handle a subject at a higher level, it may not be socially or emotionally ready for them to move to that level. So anyway, I think to the extent that we can meet individual needs, we will continue to try to do that. I think there's a lot that we try to do on that already. But I don't think that the concept, right now, I don't see us in the position of being able to say, we're going to individualize the instructional program for every child who might be able to be, in 3rd grade accelerated into 5th grade science, and another child into 4th grade science, and another kid into 6th grade science. I don't see that happening, but the general concept of trying to meet kids' individual needs as much as we can, I would agree with.
But I will say that, and just one last comment, Chairman,
You're
is
welcome
that,
to have the last comment, but Dr. Title is not.
okay. But, so my thought is, the whole socio-emotional issue is the big concern, because, for example, if a 5th grader is ready to do 10th grade math and you put him inside a 10th grade classroom, that could be a big problem. But in a district this large, the beauty of it is there may be 10, 12, 15 other kids just like him at his age who are ready. And we would have that opportunity within a district like ours to be able to create a program like that. Similarly, if most programs don't allow a cluster of kids who maybe should be taking a topic in 7th grade, but maybe who wouldn't be ready, who aren't ready until 8th or 9th grade, they need to move at a slower pace. Because we have such a large district, we have a larger population where we could actually match that age maturity along with a different type of academic ability. And so I view it as a huge opportunity that we could be taking advantage of. I know our neighboring districts, when I talk to those parents, that is the one thing they focus on, is that they love their levels. And the other thing that I've heard from teachers in our district as well is the one thing they said is, I don't care about textbooks, I don't care about all this, I just want my levels back. And that resonates with me, particularly when it isn't a huge cost necessarily, it's an organizational kind of theological approach to how we deliver education and group the students.
Thank you. Mr. Fattabine.
Well, many of my questions were answered and some weren't, but I think to be more efficient at this point in time, I'm not sure what the chair's how the chair's going to manage the time, where they want to go, but I assume we're pretty close to the end of the discussion on this particular topic.
I was assuming that for tonight's session, yes.
Right, so therefore, I'm just going to have a few closing sort of comments. I think,
Closing for you, there may be other board members who
right,
still have...
closing for me, I only speak
Yeah,
for
right,
myself.
okay.
Closing comments for myself. This is clearly an ambitious plan in a sense. And whether you want to accomplish all these things is really a question of degree. And a lot of these are somewhat open-ended to how many of the resources are devoted for a particular topic. So it really depends on a matter of degree. One of my concerns is that, our obligation and our mission is based on every student, not just subsets of students. So you want to see something for every student. And I think Ms. Carnell had a very good point in that we often have things for what is termed struggling learners or struggling students or high achievers, but often the middle group, the group that can probably benefit maybe disproportionately better for a small resource allocation and have a bigger impact on their life. In other words, in essence, maybe more bang for your buck in achieving student performance in that middle group possibly than some of the other groups. So part of my concern, and since our obligation is to every student, it's in our mission as well as our long-term goals. Our long-term goals are to assure that every student is engaged in a rigorous learning experience that recognizes and values the individual and challenges each student to achieve academic progress. Each student should achieve academic progress, not just some students, each student. So my concern is the balancing of what we provide to every student so that each student is challenged to achieve academic progress. So in implementing this plan, certain subgroups are being addressed, but every student should be addressed. And that's what I'd like to see maybe a little more highlighted in this plan, that every student is going to achieve academic progress.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Llewellyn, the expression on your face when he said
Yes, sir.
final comment told me that you wanted to say something.
Well, I thought it'd be probably very helpful, as we're going to be moving on to another topic, for folks to go through and comment as to whether or not anything should be added to Appendix A for consideration prior to the next meeting, so that it doesn't come at the end.
Yeah, if you had something in mind right now, you're free to say it, or board members can also send it in to Dr. Title
Sure.
directly.
So in terms of the statistics, I think it'd be great to add, we've got a lofty goal here of number one, which is tracking down children who've left the district. But it would be good to understand, as they exit the district, did the students find careers where they wanted to? Or, did they get into the college they wanted to? Where did they get into? With systems like Naviance, it should be pretty easy to report back to the board because it's the push of a button. I also think that on here, because we have a high-performing district, we should be reporting the ACTs and the SATs to track. Also publicly available information that should just be easily consolidated into one place. One of the other things that we might want to consider adding here, and maybe it's an aside, is a survey of parents and students as to how much time how much time is spent on and what is the quality of the homework. I've heard a lot of discussion as to, is the homework system going to change, and are there ways to do other things? I think we probably want to reach out to those who are the clients and find out what's working for them and what's not working for them, as opposed to perceptions of what's working and what's not working. And I think that, depending upon the cost of what it costs, what the cost is to survey high school students who leave, although that's, nice information to have, I think given that teachers are probably the core of our educational system, we should be spending that money on exit interviews by a third party so that we understand, why we're losing staff. Are there reasons, or are there no reasons? But I think that that's something that should be tracked as a key priority, because the teachers are the core of our system.
Thank you. Any other comments quickly? If not, Mrs. Maxon Connelly.
Sorry, this will take a couple of minutes because I still had my other two categories, but I'll do them quickly. First, I just had one point to both Ms. Carnell's and Mr. Fadibean's point. On pages 16, 17, and 18 in the plan, if you look at assessments number 6, 11, 13, 15, and 16, I don't see how those could be construed as in any way other than that's targeting every student in the district for improvement. Again, that's 6, 11, 13, 15, and 16. That's going at their skills, the skills of creative thinking, critical thinking, communication, collaboration, science, writing, reading, and math. Those are looking at moving students up, and that's not targeting just the gifted, that's not targeting the struggling learner. So there's already embedded in here 5 assessments targeting all learners. So that's one point. As for the keeping, to Dr. Title's point of almost 2.5 hours ago, I actually have to contradict Mr. Llewellyn on this one. I absolutely have a favorite child, and that is that high school survey. First of all, I was just reading an article in Educational Research that some of the most notoriously poor evaluators of their education actually can be the students themselves at the time that they are getting at. Now, I don't make that as a blanket statement because I think I get lots of valuable feedback from my children when I ask them about how something is going. On the other hand, the preponderance of students who will highly evaluate a teacher for whom they get a good grade, when the evidence points very clearly to that teacher being easier than a teacher who is more challenging and who therefore gets evaluated more poorly by the student. That in fact, I think it's, talk about our clients, it's our clients whom we have moved on in the world and who are now taking the knowledge and the skills we've given them and had to put it into practical application and have risen or fallen accordingly based on how we've trained them. That is easily my favorite child. I'll reiterate that I appreciate the many non-traditional methods being used in here for the assessment. 2 other points, this is going back about an hour, but I very much appreciated seeing the attention being addressed to the revised middle school schedule and the UA program in the middle school. I think that's going to be invaluable. I also appreciated the attention on page 24 to the transition to grade 6, especially given the new world language schedule. I know we as a board have received a few emails from parents concerned that that support structure of grade 6 would not be quite as strong for them anymore, so I appreciated seeing that. And I guess I'll direct this to the staff since Dr. Title stepped out for a moment. A couple of changes I had wanted to see. First of all, just a technical issue, but on page 3 of the plan, literally just in terms of the introduction, it seemed appropriate in that first paragraph to indicate that the plan, the mission and goals did first come through policy in terms of that the policy committee worked on that. And I actually would like to see, in addition, and I saw it happening on page 28 in the communications section, that I thought it would be appropriate to add, again, in communication, something to the effect of partner with the policy committee of the Board of Ed in the implementation of policies to support this program. And one place where I saw that in particular, if you look on page 27 in technology, the implementing a consistent bring your own device program on 4-8, the 4-10 develop and implement consistent practices in the proper use of technology. Some of those that's things we have touched on in the policy committee, so it would make sense that in the support of this program that there might need to be communication for this plan's success with whoever's serving on the policy committee to move that forward. I'd also hope to see a little bit, something more explicit that was addressing, this is from page 4 of the mission and goals, the idea of the responsible citizen and the idea of ethical behavior. Not something that I think those are quite the intangibles, they're difficult to address. The responsible citizen being part of the mission, and under the educational goals, the first bullet point, the idea of the exhibiting ethical behavior. I know those were very important points to that ad hoc committee that had worked on the creation of this, and I'm not quite sure where I see that that's being encouraged, and it could very well be, but that was just something I would have been interested in seeing more. And I have to, on that topic, it makes me especially interested, that might be addressed in this upcoming social studies curriculum review, that I could see that certainly at least citizenship might be something there. I don't know what changes we might see afoot, but those were some reactions that I had. And I'd like to reiterate what Ms. Carnell said, which is an appreciation for just the scope of this work.
Sorry, I had to leave.
It's quite all right.
I have an able staff that's got it all down.
I see no further comments on this side. Anything on this side? Ms. Carnell.
It's more of a question. You rambled the numbers so quickly, I couldn't.
Sorry.
So if you can just, do you mind?
Sure.
'Cause I'd like to
Number
follow.
6.
Give me a page,
Okay,
please.
I apologize. Page 16.
Great, okay.
So if you look at assessment number 6, and then on the next page, 11 and 13, and then on the final page, 15 and 16.
And the final page being number 18.
Sorry, thank you. That if you look at what's being asked in each of those 5 assessments, I don't see how there's any learner in the district who every teacher wouldn't be motivated. I mean, all of them are responsible for bringing that baseline percentile of achievement up, which means you have to target that. In fact, quite frankly, you almost benefit more from targeting a student who might be in the range of on something like the CMT, for example, if they're currently scoring at proficient or just barely at goal. You, in fact, are more motivated sometimes to target that student because you can get a much greater gain. So I see all 5 of those assessments. I was just trying to find something because I think you raise a very important point. It's so easy to forget that large group in the middle, and I saw all 5 of these assessments in different ways, targeting very fundamental skills for every learner in the district.
I'm not sure I necessarily respectfully agree. I mean, you can talk about a CMT or one of those, but how about the kid that takes a midterm and gets the C? Are we helping that student who received the C get to the B? That's more of what I'm referring to.
No? Okay.
And
And
I-
Eileen, last comment is yours.
And I'd like to also just point out that because we have such a broad group of learners in the classroom, the teacher's going to have to select one level to focus on to bring them up, and in doing so is not necessarily meeting the needs of the other groups. However, not necessarily. Now, some teachers are excellent, and some teachers, every teacher's different, and how they perform is going to be different based on what works best for them. We just have to acknowledge that not every teacher is going to be as effective with these very heterogeneous classrooms. I've heard it. Teachers have told me. And so if we don't acknowledge this as a fact, I think we are doing ourselves a disservice by just ignoring this. But on a different topic, on this, for the school climate survey, can we also, you've highlighted students, can we also add teachers? I feel like the teacher environment is also equally important to how effective the learning is acquired by students. That's one comment. The other one is if we can track the percentage of students that are actually taking high school math in middle school. I know that's something that is actually on the Connecticut State website and that's tracked for each school district. And I'd like to see if we as a district are growing in that area because we were on the lower side of the high-performing districts. So some districts were in the 60, 70% students. We were kind of in the 40%. I'd just like to know if we are trending higher on that, particularly given that we've added these higher level classes in 12th grade for kids that are done with calculus by 11th. Are we actually meeting that kind of dream of pushing kids forward? And then the other question is, in our A, B, and BC, are we also growing the number of kids that are taking the A-B test and then also growing the pool that are taking the BC test? While I understand we're having more kids get 3s on them, how are we actually growing the difficulty level of the progression?
I'll say one thing before you close up.
Okay, but Ms. Lou McCormick, can I ask you a favor? Let Dr. Title have the last word at this time.
I just want to make one comment about measurements and how they connect, and we try very hard to incentivize the right things. And there was a conscious decision made here to insert in almost every academic area in here, not just incentivizing teachers to get kids at or above grade level, but we're also tracking the percent above grade level. So in other words, you'll see places where, say in grade 4, one of the measures is how many kids get to grade level. If that were the only measure, then the kid who's at grade level barely, and maybe is the kid who gets the B- or whatever, the teacher might be incentivized to not pay as much attention to that kid because that's enough. But in every one of these, we added above grade level as another measure. So the teacher is incentivized to try to move as many kids as possible into the upper levels, to be at least a grade level above where they are. And you'll see that. And we actually added that in the, for an example, we added it in the AP scores. It used to be just percent 3 and above was the measure. And we added into it percent at 4 and above on AP. So we tried to capture in the data, not just getting kids to grade level was not enough, that there are plenty of kids at grade level and we're trying to push them to above grade level. I guess maybe you were trying to say that as well, but I just want to point that out as a general theme here. And the second thing is that we'll certainly take all the suggestions and look at them, but just remember that Appendix A, all the student performance indicators are student performance indicators. They're not teacher indicators. We may gather data about teachers and so forth and their practices and everything in some of the specific actions, but the rule on the student performance indicators is they're called student performance indicators because they track student progress, because that's ultimately what the mission is. That's all I want to say.
Thank you.
Sorry.
I should tell the board members that this document has also been sent to the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Finance, and to the RTM, asking for any comments that they have, and please feed them back to us as representatives of citizens as well.
That's on the website.
And this document is also posted on the website.
It's also posted on the website for people to give us feedback on it.
Yes, right.
Just like you do with the curriculum. You pull it up, and anybody can go in there, and there's text boxes, and we will get all of that, so we can get public comment for people who can't come to meetings. Anybody can go on the website, set it up, and it's on there, and there's 3 focus questions, and we want to get feedback from anybody out there who wants to comment.
Okay, on to the Board of Education handbook that is in front of you at the table. This was first developed in 2012, and you don't want to stay for the handbook conversation?
I promised the staff they could leave after the district improvement plan. This was an extra night.
This handbook was initially and still intended to try and capture in one document various policies, laws, practices, bylaws, and whatnot that guided how we did our business at the table, so that it would be a guide to old as well as new members, as well as members of the public. For tonight's meeting, I just thought I'd walk through and show you where the changes were made. These are not changes to any existing policy or practice or bylaw. This was, let's record the last 2 years' worth of changes in the document. The last document on page 3, the letter was actually signed by our prior chair, Pam Iacona. So this letter would bring the new mission statement into the letter and then signed by the chair as well.
Excuse me, forgive me, but did we get this in our Friday package?
No, this was not ready until
So
today.
why at 10 after 10 are we starting this when we're supposed to go into, the reason for this meeting originally was executive
We're
session?
doing this just simply to introduce it so that board members understand how
Well,
this
I have about 22 comments on it.
was constructed, okay?
No, but I'm saying I have about 22 comments.
Can I at least summarize what changes were in here?
Maybe I'm not making myself clear. I appreciate what you're saying, but I'm going to want to comment. And at 10 after 10, when we were called here for an executive meeting to do self-evaluation, and this wasn't in our Friday packet, I'm not trying to understand why we're starting this at 10 after 10.
Because we just had a very healthy discussion on the district improvement plan.
This is a special
Order.
meeting, though.
This is a special meeting.
Maybe to save time, we know, you can just highlight, you can indicate what the changes are in red, I guess. The changes are in red.
That's all I'm
is that
doing.
10?
That's
And
all my
we can
intent
all
was.
read those and comment on
That's all
them
my
later.
intent was, Mr. Fatterby.
Well, I just want to clarify what, you can identify what the changes are. We can all read them for ourselves.
No, I'm not
And
going
come
to
back
read
and
them.
comment on them later.
I'm-
Just identify what the procedure is for identifying changes.
And
That's all
that's
you
what I
need
was
to do.
attempting to do. On page 4, we brought in the new,
You're going into substance. In other words, I think for the brevity, we have a meeting after this. It's going to possibly take a long period of time. It's late an hour. I think we just have to, you have to not just indicate, these are the proposed changes. We'll discuss it at a later time.
can I finish my sentence before you interrupt a member of the board, if I might?
You can
So
direct the meeting in any way you choose. You're the chair.
Thank you. But I also am a member of the board that has the right to not be interrupted. Page 4 was bringing in the revised mission and goals that was adopted. That moved on to page 5 and 6. These come directly from the goals statement, from the policy statement that is the mission and goals. We have added a second meeting in October, so you'll see on page 8 that that is recorded. We had a bylaw that changed that the agenda will be done in consultation with the vice chair and secretary. That bylaw was put into here. The public comment on agenda items was a lengthy change because the bylaw that was adopted thought that the entire bylaw ought to be in there. You might recall that we, on page 10, when we adopted the revised Roberts Rules, we stated it would be the most recent addition rather than naming addition, so that change was put in here. Just a minor change that now that we've gone into 2 other election cycles, that instead of commenting about 11 and 13, 15 and 17 are in there. And then there's no other changes on the rest of the document that's been in existence until you get to page 17, which was the bylaw change on the requests from board members, that the changes appropriate for that bylaw were put in here. And then the Communications Committee that met and gave their report before the 4 new board members joined the board had recommended that we add a couple of definitions in the definitions page. The Communications Committee reviewed and wrote those definitions, and so those are in here. The assumption is that board members will review this, read it, and that we'll put it back on the agenda for further review and discussion at a future board meeting. And if you have any comments that you want to make on it in the meantime, send them in. The last time we did this, this was an iterative process that we just kept editing until everybody said this accurately portrays what we currently do. Comments or questions?
Okay, I have one question and one comment. On page 10, number 3,
Number 3, page 10?
sorry, it's late in the hour. Page 10.
Yeah,
Okay. That has always been there?
yes.
Okay. I don't remember it, but that's fine.
Any item in black,
No, right. And number 2, I'd like to know when we're going to put it on the agenda, not leave it open-ended.
well, each agenda is set based on the items that are required to be handled. My hope would be to put it on each agenda, as long as time would permit for that to happen.
Okay, then otherwise I want to stay here and go over all the items. So can we please get a date when this will be put on an agenda? Because I'm sure that nobody wants to stay here and do this.
I'll send you out the date that, I have to look at the 2 May meetings and see what is on that agenda. I'll say that the second May meeting, if all goes well with the budget,
Right.
because that May meeting frequently has had a lengthy discussion on the budget, and if all goes well with the budget, that suddenly frees up some significant time on that meeting date.
Let's not assume that, because the budget, as you know, is a lengthy meeting.
So I need to look at the next two agendas to determine which meeting in May this makes sense to put back on.
So we can agree that it'll be on either one of those.
One or the other.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments for where we are with the handbook? One other comment I should make is on the page 4. I'm sure Jen will pick this up eventually. There's some adjective or some word missing. We don't start sentences, "Will ensure that every student is,"
Already got it.
yeah, there's something missing there, and
I
Meg...
think it's the beginning of the strikeout. It should have been the long-term goal.
Yeah, so Meg is going to look at it to figure out what got dropped. Okay, thank you. We're now at the self-evaluation. The recommended motion is that the Board of Education hereby moves to enter into executive session in accordance with CGS 1206A to discuss the board's self-evaluation. Do I have a motion? Mrs. Maxon Cannelli, Mrs. Gerber, any discussion on the motion? Having none, all in favor, raise your hand. It is unanimous. We're now in executive session. For the benefit of the people who are having to dismantle this equipment, because we won't have any further public business, it There will be no business coming out of the executive session